So now that free agency is officially underway, and we've seen plenty of moves this past week that just make no sense. See money being thrown out there like a bunch of drunk sailors on shore leave. It's crazy. Like 6-year-olds at the candy store just got their $5 allowance and can't wait because that money's burning a hole in their damn pocket. That's what this shit reminds me of when it comes to free agency. It does change perhaps some things pertaining to the 2016 NFL Draft. So I'm here with another updated mock draft, a 3-round edition. You can check out all of those picks in the description box down below. I'm going to try and talk about as many of the first-round picks this particular time as possible because there are teams I've talked about a lot, teams that I've talked about not so much, and in particular, I tend to gravitate towards the teams at the top because, let's face it, those are the marquee picks. And starting off with the marquee picks in this mock draft, I've talked about it before, and I've talked about it again. The 6 guys that I think, if there's any justice in this world, 6 guys that if people are actually good at doing their jobs when it comes to scouting departments and NFL front offices, there are 6 guys that are clearly, to me, a cut above the rest. 6 guys that should be the first 6 picks in the 2016 NFL Draft in some particular order. That's got to be Jalen Ramsey, Myles Jack, Laremy Tunsil, Ezekiel Elliott, Carson Wentz, DeForest, Buckner. In some type of order, those guys should be the first 6 picks in this year's draft. That's what it should be, because you can logically make sense of it with those 6 guys going somewhere in those first 6 picks, like I have done, in my opinion, in this particular mock draft. Now, the first surprise you may see, the first big change you'll see, starts off at pick number 1. This time I've got the Titans taking Jalen Ramsey. And I've referenced this before. Some of the buzz about that the Titans might really like Jalen Ramsey, and my thought process was, some people think maybe they should trade down to take Jalen Ramsey, but my thought was, is if you think he's the number 1 guy and you think he's the best player on the board, and there most certainly is an argument to be made that he is the top player in the entire 2016 NFL Draft, then you take that guy. I could make an equally strong, vociferous argument for taking Laremy Tunsil, especially because you've got Marcus Mariota. You need to better protect Marcus Mariota, and having Tunsil and Luan as bookend tackles for a decade is incredibly appealing. There's no question about that. At the end of the day, I've referenced it when I did my Tunsil scouting report video. There are little bits of questions about him that maybe make you take a step back and pause about whether or not you'd really want to invest the number 1 overall pick in the guy. Whereas I don't see any of those same type of potential red flag concern areas with Jalen Ramsey. An alpha male, alpha dog type of leader on a defense over the past couple of years that was full of talent and full, frankly, of alpha dogs. He was that dude. And if the Tennessee Titans decide at number 1 overall they've got to take Jalen Ramsey, which I think is at least a 50% possibility they will, if not greater at this moment, then that's what they got to do. If he's the best player on the board, you take the best player on the board because you're the Titans. You've got needs all over the place. You're just not a good football team. So I don't know if you can really raise one need above another, if that makes sense. It helps this mock draft make a little more sense to me, and it works a little bit better because Tennessee taking Jalen Ramsey at 1 after the Browns do the smart, sensible thing you would think, you would hope, and take Carson Wentz number 2 because that's got to be their dude. That is their guy. It's like I can't bang the drum enough for this. The Cleveland Browns need Carson Wentz. Carson Wentz needs to be a Cleveland Brown. If the Cleveland Browns want to stop being the Cleveland skid marks and they want Hugh Jackson to be successful as an NFL head coach again, they need Carson Wentz. Period. End of discussion. You get to pick 3 with San Diego, Laremy Tunsil. It seems like a match made in heaven. Because while Jalen Ramsey would work there, it makes a tremendous amount of sense there, and he would be a star for them there. At the end of the day, that's still Phillip Rivers' team. And as a result, when you're talking about Phillip Rivers, you need to better protect him. And, we could talk about wide receiver. And you can maybe argue wide receiver is every bit of big of a need, and you won't get a lot of argument from me in that sense. But they'll hope to have Keenan Allen coming back from injury. They signed Travis Benjamin. That was actually kind of a somewhat solid signing in free agency. They need somebody to help protect Phillip Rivers. They don't have that big-time left tackle. They just don't. And Laremy Tunsil could come in and instantly be that dude. To me, makes all the sense in the world. As does, frankly, Ezekiel Elliott going number 4 to the Cowboys. And it makes sense for a couple of reasons. Number 1, you've invested so heavily in that offensive line. You want to get as much out of that investment in the offensive line as possible. Number 2, this is a Cowboys team that enjoyed its greatest success in the 90s with Emmitt Smith in the backfield, a former first-round pick running back out of Florida. Granted, he wasn't a top 5 pick, but they took him, 17th overall in 1990? They remember that formula for success. And they've deviated somewhat from that formula for success. On top of the fact that you see an organization that still seems to be committed to a mid-30s injury-prone Tony Romo, you've got to better protect Tony Romo. And yes, Myles Jack is incredibly appealing for them here. Maybe DeForest Buckner is as well. And if they did take those guys, I would not knock them. Because as I've stated, those top 6 guys, if they go somewhere in the first 6 picks, I'm probably not going to knock any of those teams if they took any one of those guys for the most part. But the Cowboys, to me, Ezekiel Elliott makes the most sense. If for anything else, now with the Eagles having the 8th overall pick and the Giants having the 10th overall pick, there's a very good chance that Elliott would end up with one of those 2 teams. Would the Dallas Cowboys want to run the risk of facing Ezekiel Elliott twice a year when an argument could be made that he may be indeed the best player in this draft class? This could be cock block as much as anything else. And sometimes cock block is an effective draft strategy. If the player makes sense and he fills an appropriate need and you rate him in a certain level and it makes sense to take him there, cock block is an effective way to draft sometimes because you have to sit there and say, hey, if we don't take this guy, there's a chance somebody else in our division does. Do we really want to face this guy twice a year with the memory in his mind of us passing on him for somebody else? That's a legitimate concern. So I've got the Cowboys taking Ezekiel Elliott number 4 here. I'm curious for you Cowboy fans. Would you like that? Would you not like that? Would you prefer Myles Jack? Would you prefer DeForest Buckner? I'm sure you probably prefer Jalen Ramsey the most if he fell there. But at this point in time, I don't know if he is going to fall there. The Jaguars at 5, one of those lock, stock, barrel picks to me would be Myles Jack. In fact, I wouldn't be surprised if the Jaguars and Cowboys worked out a small deal where the Jaguars maybe gave up a 4th or 5th round pick to move up one slot to number 4 to make sure they got Myles Jack, so that way the Cowboys could still get Ezekiel Elliott at 5. That's one thing I would think that needs to happen because the Jaguars need Myles Jack. They've invested big money in their defensive line with guys like Odrick and guys like Malik Jackson and the drafting last year in the first round of Dante Fowler, who hopefully he's not doing any more hoe fights in the hallway. He'll be focused on recovering from his ACL injury and coming back and making some type of impact as an edge rusher in 2016. This defense needs their Bobby Wagner. And Myles Jack could be that Bobby Wagner type of guy. Makes a world of sense. As does DeForest Buckner, number 6 to the Baltimore Ravens. I'm sorry, he's just a better football player than Joey Bosa. That is a fact. And he's a much better, more natural fit for that 3-4 Ravens defense. And with Ezekiel Elliott off the board, and with an edge rusher that really isn't justified being taken 6 overall, DeForest Buckner is that type of prospect that makes a lot of sense for the Ravens. He fills that kind of big-name program, started several years experience, kind of that safe double or triple pick that Ozzie Newsome loves more than the home run guy in round number 1. But other picks you look at, number 7, I've got Darron Lee going to the San Francisco 49ers. The assumption is that the 49ers would take a quarterback or a wide receiver there. I think Jared Goff's draft stock might drop a little bit. As a result, you look at wide receiver. I don't know at this moment if there's a wide receiver that's going to go in the top 10. Even though there is one wide receiver that I could argue should be a top 10 pick, it doesn't mean that he ends up going in the top 10. So looking at it, you got to remember when Chip Kelly first went to Philadelphia, in 2013, yes, they spent a first-round pick on an offensive lineman, and in 2015, they spent a pick on a wide receiver. But 2014, they spent a first-round pick on Marcus Smith. And, for a team that lost so much in their linebacking core, especially in the middle with Patrick Willis and Chris Borland before this past season, a guy like Darron Lee helped himself a ton with the combine. And when you watch his film, you see a guy that has top 10 player potential. You're going to get a couple of surprise picks every year in the top 10. And typically they come somewhere between 7 to 10. And this would be one of them here. 8, Philadelphia. What's funny is when I heard about the trade for Byron Maxwell and Kiko Alonso to the Dolphins, I guess I wasn't paying much attention. I thought there was something involved, but I just didn't care. I'm like, well, that's kind of dumb. Why would you take on a number 2 corner with a bum shoulder getting paid number 1 corner money and a young inside linebacker who can't stay healthy and has bulky knees that he's torn up multiple times? But then I saw that the Dolphins traded out of 8 to go down to 13 to get those 2 guys. Mike Tannenbaum is a fucking idiot, period. They let Olivier Vernon and Derek Shelby go in free agency so they can keep Cameron Wake in his mid-30s at a huge cap figure coming off an Achilles injury and bring in a Mario Williams, another guy that has maybe seen better days, and on top of that, played like he didn't give a fuck last year in Buffalo. So you got older and arguably not as good. and you tied yourself into more cap room, or you tied up more cap space by cutting Brent Grimes, which I understand why they would have done it because his wife's a dumb bitch. But then they bring in Byron Maxwell, again, a number 2 corner with a bum shoulder getting paid number 1 corner money. The Eagles in this case, Ronnie Stanley, makes a world of sense. So that's what I've got going there. I've got the Buccaneers at 9 getting Joey Bosa. I think it's a good fit for all parties involved. And for those of you that think Bosa is a top 5 pick in this draft, I'm going to stick to my guns. I just don't see it. I've got the Giants at 10 taking William Jackson. I don't know what the fuck they're going to do. I'm going to be honest with you. Again, this is another one of those kind of surprise picks at 10. You know, Amukamura is gone. Yes, they've signed Norris Jenkins to big money, but how much longer is DRC going to be there? And frankly, that Giants defense still stinks anyways, even with all the money they've spent on it. They need to get younger and more athletic on the defensive side of the ball, and a guy like William Jackson III would make some sense. The Bears at 11, I've got them taking Leonard Floyd. Vic Fangio, the defensive coordinator of the Bears, likes longer-armed types as edge rushers. See Aldon Smith in San Francisco as one example. And Leonard Floyd, to me, would be that type of guy that I think they would really like in terms of his versatility, the different things he could do, and with that length and explosiveness he has off the edge. The Bears need to get better in that linebacking core, and that genius signing of Danny Trevathan this year, combined with the really good signing, almost genius signing of Pernell McPhee last offseason, you know, you've got the makings of a really good linebacking core. Now you need to get some more young athleticism in that core to complement those 2 bedrocks that you have with Trevathan on the inside and McPhee on the outside. And Leonard Floyd would be a nice piece there. You got to factor in some dipshit factor in the draft every year. I always talk about it. The Saints at 12, A'Shawn Robinson. He shouldn't be in anybody's first round. If your team grades him as a top 31 player in this draft, you have to ask them what the fuck they see and what the fuck they're thinking and why they have their jobs. But nonetheless, somebody's going to take him, and I wouldn't be surprised if he goes very, very high like here. 13, the Dolphins. The one good thing about this is that peeling back 5 slots, they could still get a guy like Vernon Hargreaves, which is who I have them taking. You know, I have my concerns about whether or not he's a number 1 corner at the NFL level. Worst case scenario, he's potentially an elite slot corner. You know, not going to give him a whole lot of grief for taking a Hargreaves here at 13. When you look at the Raiders at 14, and you look at their first 2 rounds, frankly, Reggie Ragland at linebacker from Alabama. Then round 2, they turn around Darron Thompson, the safety from Boise State. You know, they've spent some money on their defense in the offseason, and, you know, they've got a defense that has the makings of potentially being pretty good. But the one thing that is a concern area or a weakness area, one area they need to get better is up at the middle, and in particular in the back half of that defense. And with those first 2 picks, Reggie Ragland and Darron Thompson, it should make them a lot better in a hurry. And, you know, for them, again, at 14, I think Reggie Ragland's another one of those sensible kind of safe picks, similar to what they've had the last 2 years in Khalil Mack and Amari Cooper. And him going there, I think when all else is said and done, the guy that is the best fit, that makes the most sense to me for the Raiders at that draft slot is Reggie Ragland, even if that is just a little bit above what his actual value maybe is. You might be surprised to see the Rams taking Corey Coleman at number 15. You know, who knows what the hell the Rams are going to do. For all we know, they end up bringing in RG3 or Colin Kaepernick. God, Christ knows. It would probably be RG3. You know, that would be their thing. It'd be like, it's the ultimate troll, even though we won't make the playoffs. But even with that said, you know, maybe they grade Corey Coleman as a more highly rated player than a Jared Goff. Maybe they believe in Sean Mannion. Maybe they think they want to be stupid and try Nick Foles again or Case Keenum again, whatever the case might be. Just for some reason, it seems so logical that the Rams would take a quarterback here, especially with the Jared Goff dropping to them. It just seems like the Rams wouldn't actually do it. The Lions at 16 taking Jack Conklin. I don't think he should be taken that high. But, you know, when you look at the Lions picks, more likely than not, especially with the signing of Marvin Jones, it probably allows them to ignore wide receiver in round 1, especially with Coleman off of the board, and they can go with the trenches, either offensive or defensive tackle is probably where they're going to go. And in this case, they probably go with Jack Conklin. I love Bullard to the Falcons at 17, his schematic fit. You know, they've spent some money on defensive linemen in free agency, the Falcons have, with guys like Adrian Claiborne and Derek Shelby. But now, to me, Jonathan Bullard is that type of Michael Bennett player that they really need in that defense. Dan Quinn wants speed on that defense, and he needs speed up front and athleticism up front. And believe me, Jonathan Bullard is going to bring that in great abundance. He is a top 10 to 12 talent in this draft to me, and frankly would be a steal for the Falcons to get him at number 17. I've got the Colts taking Vernon Butler at 18. You know, it is what it is. Ragland would be an option there. Maybe an edge rusher is an option there. But it's just who I had him take in this case. Oh, Ogbah going 19 to the Bills. You know, for some reason, I still think Ogbah might be a top 20 pick, and he probably helped himself quite a bit at the Combine. And the Bills need better young talent outside at the defensive end position, and Ogbah would seem to fit that mold. And if they try to play more 3-4, you could beef up Ogbah a little bit and maybe make him a more athletic 3-4 defensive end, which I still think might be his best position at the NFL level. The Jets at 20, Jared Goff is there. You got to take him. You just got to take him. Because at that point in time, he's the best player on the board. At that point in time, especially what's going on with your dealings with Fitzpatrick, even if you re-sign Fitzpatrick, how much do you want to tie yourself to him and for how long? Jared Goff, you could bring him in, give him some time to learn, potentially give him some time to develop. Are you going to put the keys to the car in Geno Smith's hands or Bryce Petty's hands? I don't think so. Washington at 21, defensive back help Eli Apple. 22, Houston, since they signed Brock Osweiler. So let me get this straight. They pay a guy that's going to be 26 this year that basically, for all intents and purposes, from an experience standpoint in games, is an NFL rookie, having only started, 7 of them? They've paid him like he's a franchise quarterback. Typically, teams win championships with quarterbacks that they draft. That is the trend. And you could sit there and say, well, the Broncos technically won the Super Bowl. Peyton Manning was a free agent. Yeah, that's true. But they probably would have won it even more easily with the guy that they had drafted in 2012 and Brock fucking Osweiler. So, with that said, they've got the quarterback in place. They brought in Lamar Miller. Where do they go now? Wide receiver, getting a speed complement to DeAndre Hopkins makes a ton of sense. Will Fuller, I think, has helped himself a bit in the draft process, so there you go. White here, 23 to Minnesota. They need help inside at guard. 24, Andrew Billings, the defensive tackle. I know there's going to be some thought process about wide receiver or maybe another position, but defensive tackle has been a glaring need opposite of Geno Atkins for years. I know a lot of Bengals fans say amen and hallelujah to Andrew Billings at 24. The Pittsburgh Steelers taking Jason Spriggs at 25 because maybe they want some young athletic offensive tackle at the same point in time. Because they should be focusing on defensive back, they won't focus on defensive back. That's what they do. I've got Rankins going 26 to the Seahawks. He would seem to fit their system good. 27, Kamale Correa from Boise State. I actually wouldn't be surprised when the draft process is all said and done if he isn't a top 20 pick, like maybe all the way up to Indianapolis at 18, especially since they've waived Bjorn Werner. Correa, though, there's things about him that remind me a little bit about Clay Matthews when he was coming out of USC. So for him at 27, even with them bringing Nick Perry back for 1 year, that doesn't preclude them, even if Julius Peppers is back another year, it doesn't preclude them for drafting a guy like Correa for the long term, so that way they can for sure, have a long-term effective edge rusher opposite of Clay Matthews. 28, with the loss of Sean Smith and free agency to the Raiders, Kendall Fuller would seem to be a worthwhile gamble here for the Chiefs. 29, Noah Spence. I'm not as high on him as others. I think there's a team that late in round one like Seattle, like Arizona, that could want to gamble on a Noah Spence, and it makes some sense that they would. I think Arizona's the perfect fit for him, though. This is a team that needs to get better in terms of their pass rush. And Noah Spence, even though I have some concerns about whether or not he can play in a 3-4, him and Marcus Golden opposite each other isn't a bad combination. And I think that infrastructure they have in place with Kime and with head coach Bruce Arians would be pretty good for Spence. 30, I've got Carolina taking Kevin Dodd because even though they brought back Charles Johnson after releasing him on that 1-year deal, and, they've got Coney Ely, who burst onto the scene in the Super Bowl. I still think they'd like another young edge rusher, and Dodd would give them that. And then the Broncos at 31, Paxton Lynch. I didn't rig it this way. It's just the way that it worked. Maybe you get a guy that reminds some people of Osweiler, even though I don't think it's an entirely appropriate comparison other than the fact that they're about the same 6'7", 6'8" size. But we'll see what happens with the Broncos in the quarterback position now that Manning's gone, now that Osweiler's gone. But in this particular case, it just worked out that Paxton Lynch ended up being there. And then one other notable pick in round 2. Don't kill my dream, damn it. Jalen Smith to the Chicago Bears. I don't care. Redshirt him a year. Redshirt him 2 years. I want Jalen Smith in Chicago. And if it goes this way, I'd probably cry tears of joy to have Leonard, Floyd, and Jalen Smith. That's just me. Again, you can check out all my picks. 3 rounds in the description box down below. Let me know what you think. If you have any questions, thoughts, comments, concerns, criticisms, let me have them. I'll try to respond to them as many as I can. With that, I bid you adieu, and I'll see you later. Make sure you keep checking out the individual scouting report videos on this channel, and I'll probably, to answer questions, I'll talk a little bit more about free agency in a video or 2 to come soon.